Welcome back to Movies TV Mad. You can follow me on Twitter at Movies TV Mad, and a very warm welcome to Friday's edition of the DC Universe Daily. It's really interesting to me how this sell Snyderverse to Netflix hashtag has captured the zeitgeist. You know, journalists like Mark Hughes from Forbes are writing about this. Screen Rant's writing about this. Lots of big journalistic entertainment people are writing about this. So already it feels like the Snyder Cut vibe. And it's very exciting because it's captured people's imagination. Of course, we must remember Netflix and WBD could shoot this down very, very soon. So let's enjoy it while it's happening. So I want to read out to you the Forbes article from Mark Hughes because I think it's really, really good. Warner Brothers Discovery selling the DCEU Snyderverse to Netflix is surprisingly the best option by Mark Hughes. Hashtag activism is the popular stuff of superhero film fandom, and Warner Brothers Discovery has faced a stream of such hashtag movements about their cinematic DC Extended Universe. But the new sell Zack Snyder's Snyderverse to Netflix message is one of a rare few that seems crazy but actually could work, and just might have some unexpected, albeit unintentional, side benefits to consider. That's why I think Warner Brothers Discovery selling the DCEU Snyderverse to Netflix could surprisingly be the best option. I want to be clear that I'm excited to have Gunn writing a new Superman movie, and I'm eager to see what Gunn and Safran have in store for a new era of DC movies. Aren't we all? We're waiting. I just wish they'd make their announcements and forever hold their peace because I'm getting somewhat impatient. I don't like or support the angry movement calling for the firing of these two co-CEOs or for boycotts of upcoming DC projects. But the problem is, what you ignore here, Mark, is why people are calling for the firing of James Gunn. Now, it was never a reality. It doesn't make them look good. But at the end of the day, why don't you mention the historical tweets that this fandom's mentioning? What do you think of those historical tweets? I've been very honest on this platform that I think Gunn is a very talented writer-director, but those historical tweets are an issue, and I think they're disgusting. I can say I'm excited for what Gunn's got planned and Safran and still say, you know what, he did something that, let's just say, is an uncomfortable look for the studio, but they're used to it by now with Amber Heard and Ezra Miller on their books as well. Or for boycotts of upcoming DC projects. But it's also no secret I'm a big fan of Snyder's DCEU, and the other filmmakers' movies are rising from Snyder's original setup, and I'd personally, hypothetically, love to see Snyder get a chance to finish his DC plans, as would I. So if there's a way to get Snyder's vision completed in a way that's actually advantageous for DC Studios alongside the new films and plans Gunn and Safran developed, I feel like it's at least worth talking about. I don't write this to try to add pressure to DC Studios. Wow, this guy's really careful not to ruffle any feathers, isn't he? Or to any way lend support to the hateful fire Gunn and Safran demands. But you're not talking about the details of it. You're just calling it hateful. What's hateful? You know, wanting to fire James Gunn or James Gunn firing Henry Cavill after a few months ago he was brought back to play Superman in the DC Extended Universe. What's more hateful, my friend? That's the problem. This guy blocked me years ago. I think he's a great journalist, but he blocked me years ago. But this is the kind of thing he's really trying to make sure he don't piss off Zaslav, Discovery, Gunn and Safran. They're all in it together. Access Media and Studios. But anyway, this is merely an honest assessment of a new development that caught me by surprise and which I think can benefit everyone involved, including Warner Brothers Discovery and DC Studios, and in ways they may not yet realise. So buckle up and give me a chance to lay out the arguments and see if it sways you. Dear readers, this latest sell ZSJL to Netflix and sell Snyderverse to Netflix hashtag trend is an evolution of the Snyderverse and Snyder Cut movement, as it adapts to the fact Warner Brothers Discovery's newly created DC Studios is moving on from previous iterations of the DCEU under the leadership of co-CEOs James Gunn and Peter Safran. Where have we heard that before? Oh yeah, when Walter Hamada was DC Films president. It's all sounding very, very similar, isn't it? Damn it. There will be no return to the early vision and plans for the DCEU, which included Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, Suicide Squad, Wonder Woman, and for the dedicated Snyder fan base, Zack Snyder's Justice League in place of the theatrical cut of Justice League. Instead, some will reboot, others will. Well, we'll see. But for now, one thing's clear. Those who want a continuation of Snyder's original multi-film art plans are not going to get it from DC Studios' upcoming future films. Yeah, listen, there's no chance. Right, these are the things that are never going to happen. There's never going to be animated Snyderverse. There's never going, instead of restoring the Snyderverse. That's never going to happen. Your only hope, this is last chance saloons, that Netflix look at this campaign and say, and talk to WB, and maybe they're talking already, maybe they're not, maybe they all think it's a shit idea. Who knows, right? But that's the only way. This Netflix thing is the only way. But I suppose what you could do if Netflix say no, you could start a campaign for Amazon, and you could go on and on and on. It gets more and more unlikely, but I don't think this movement is ever going to give up. It's re-energized now thanks to WB firing Henry Cavill, one of the biggest own goals in entertainment history. So fans who previously launched the Release the Snyder Cut movement and succeeded in helping convince WB and HBO Max to greenlight and release Zack Snyder's Justice League quickly moved to also launch Restore the Air Cut. I supported both of these, although initially my support to release the Snyder's cut of Justice League assumed the film was only about 75 to 80% completed and could be released as is, akin to Superman 2. The Richard Donner cut, until I saw more proof of just how far along Snyder's edit was. However, when a portion of the fan base then began Restore the Snyderverse and called for boycotts against future DCEU films unless the studio reverted the DCEU back to the original plans, I didn't think it was either realistic at this point or the best option anymore for several reasons. Yeah, he doesn't like boycotts. He doesn't want to upset his friends at the studio. Listen, I don't boycott entertainment. If I think something's going to be shit, I don't support it. I don't support most modern day cinema today because it's so transparently full of propaganda. So I don't bother. I watch my old movies and my old DVDs and Blu-rays and 4Ks, right? I support what I fucking love. But I'm a DC fan, and I'm always at least going to give a DC project a chance. Then if it's shit, I'll call it out for being shit. That's the way it works. Anyway, he goes on. First and foremost, Snyder had already moved on to original projects. I was more interested in seeing him complete, plus there was so much conflict and bad feelings involved that I feared the whole thing would suffer or wind up incomplete again, and inevitable divisions. And I ultimately felt the DCEU was already settling into a new phase that either needed to be allowed to proceed or just ended completely instead of more tinkering and yet another course correction. Oh, you mean like what James and Peter are doing right now? Isn't that a course correction, Mark? I'm sure you don't think so. At some point, constantly reshuffling your movie plans and retconning back and forth undermines audiences' faith in keeping up with whatever is happening in the latest films. Again, you mean like they're doing now, Mark? But again, it seems you don't think that's what they're doing now. Anyway, and the whole thing threatens to collapse under the weight of its own indecision and perpetual revolution. Like what they're doing now, Mark? Do you know what I mean? I mean, talk about pot and kettle. When some of the fans expressed a version of Restore the Snyderverse that meant just allowing Snyder to complete his Justice League film arc in a pair of HBO Max streaming films to give that corner of the multiverse the finale it deserves, I sympathised and felt it shouldn't be too hard to convince HBO Max to invest in animated movies to complete the JL trilogy. As I say, there's some people obsessed with these animated situations. Right, let me be clear. Making animation takes longer. than actual live action. It is not fucking feasible. It's as simple as that. It's harder and more expensive to do animation over live action. It's not going to happen. And I got in trouble with a section of the Snyderverse fandom for even saying this a few years back. I lost a lot of my subscribers because I had a lot of Snyderverse subscribers before. I was doing a lot better as a YouTuber than I am now because I'm honest, straight and direct, and that doesn't go down well. Look at Chris Wong Svensson now. He stopped actually speaking about what he thinks on his ping pong flicks. He used to do half-hour videos talking about this shit. Now he's become a bit of a businessman, 9-10 minute videos, and it's a shame really because Chris inspired me to start this channel, and to see him just reduced to what he's doing now, and I'm sure he's making good money, and money talks, right? But yeah, that's a shame. But anyway, back onto this article. But my expression of support for that idea met with quick and loud backlash from most of the fans in that movement, quite right too, who only wanted live action projects, and many of whom outright condemned the notion of animated sequels as inferior and an insult. So I disengaged from them and haven't participated in any of that particular movement. The thing is, mate, as I just said, you know, the way Zack Snyder would do animation, it would take years. The man's a perfectionist. He's not going to do any less than he does in live action. It's more expensive. It's not going to work. Animation isn't a shortcut to restoring the Snyderverse. End of story. When Warner and Discovery merged and new leadership took over the film studio, the Snyder fans thought they might see a surprise change of fortune for their demands, since there seemed to be a lot of manoeuvring to reinstate certain key elements of Snyder's original cast. Now this is an interesting one. Zaslav came in talking about Wonder Woman, Batman and Superman being the front and centre of what Discovery were going to do. Now, a lot of Snyder fans believe that Zaslav, by removing Emmerich, who hasn't actually been removed, removing Sarnoff, you know, and all these people, meant that Snyder could have a second crack at the whip. Ultimately, he's made James Gunn and Peter Safran, two people who are already at DC, the head of DC Studios. It's not much of a leap, but maybe these two guys can revolutionise DC. We're going to find out very, very soon if they've actually got any intention of doing that. As well as the departure of unceremonious removal of executives towards whom this fan base was hostile, in particular Walter Hamada, who really probably is still there secretly. Fans got ahead of themselves with predictions and false rumours that multi-year contracts have been signed to bring back Henry Cavill and Ben Affleck for more movies and streaming series, all of it made up by fans or spread by pseudo-sources with their own ulterior motives and agendas. Let's see if he criticises WB for bringing Cavill back, then removing him. I bet he doesn't. He's talking about rumours and criticising fans, but he hasn't criticised the studio, has he? Have you noticed that? Then came news of Gunn and Safran taking the helm at DC Studios, followed by the announcement they were charting a new course for DC movies. Now, this is the thing that's going to be very interesting when Gunn and Safran announce some of their plans for DC Universe. Is there an exciting new course, or is it all garnish and bullshit? Because this guy's falling for it anyway. Word Cavill was officially done playing Superman. If you notice, he skips the way he was brought back, then was done playing Superman, and the cancellation of Patty Jenkins' plans for Wonder Woman 3. The fans erupted in outrage and spawned a whole new set of hashtags, all boiling down to demands that Gunn and Safran be fired. It also revived the Restore the Snyderverse hashtag. Yeah, getting rid of Henry Cavill revived all of this. None of this would have been revived if Cavill just got one more little DC Superman movie. Then he moved on. That would have worked. But I do look at the situation with Cavill. I do kind of look at the DCEU, and I've always said we do need a brand new broom to start again. But I love the Snyderverse movies, not in terms of business, but, you know, in terms of entertainment, and I would like to see that arc completed. I don't think bringing Snyder in was a good plan to make $1 billion a movie or anything. I don't think that was the right way to go. But in terms of what he made, I really enjoyed it, and I want to see it completed. Now, however, with Gunn and Safran finished with their multi-year plan to re-establish the DC fanbase along a new path for the future and build something that can stand alongside the success and acclaim of Marvel Studios' MCU, it's always you. Look, these journalists are like robots. Some of the fans have finally internalized the fact that Gunn and Safran aren't going anywhere and a new DCEU will be created. Some fans still think they can hashtag their way to victory and win a complete restructuring of the entire studio and a reversal of all plans and contracts in favour of a new slate. That puts everything back the way it was in early 2016, but I have to think most of them must realise it's been too long and there's no real chance of that happening. No. Look, Zaslav could have made that decision, but he didn't. And in terms of business, he's right not to do that situation. But we are going to find out what's going to happen very, very soon. I can't wait. I'm chomping at the bit to really get my teeth stuck into this because I think it's a very, very unique situation and we'll see. What I do think is possible, however, and why I also think is actually a smart move for a number of reasons, is the idea that Warner Bros. Discovery could license a singular set of stories and plans for development in a specific way by a particular set of people at Netflix. I know many of you are shaking your head at the very notion of it, but hear me out, and you might find yourself supporting it for reasons you didn't even consider previously. First, sorry about that, I've got a pop-up. Hang on a minute, I've got to find my place again. First, just consider it from a cold business perspective. If Warner Bros. Discovery announces a willingness and intent to offer this opportunity to Netflix, it instantly meets the demands of the fan base and puts the ball in the court of another studio. If Netflix is uninterested, then Warner Bros. Discovery can point out it's not their own fault that it's not going forward. Likewise, if the projects fail to materialize or somehow fail to meet with approval from the fans once again, Warner Bros. Discovery aren't the ones who will be blamed and the attention will be focused elsewhere. Let me promise you one thing. If Netflix say no, this movement will still blame WB. They've always got WB at the end of their tongues and it will be the same way. But anyway, in short, if Warner Bros. Discovery has no desire to develop any projects within the Snyderverse anyway, and if they are seeking ways to develop and or license properties to maximize revenue, then why not license the Snyderverse to Netflix and be done with any Warner attachment or involvement or blame from now on? From Warner Bros. Discovery's standpoint, either it works out well and DC properties have a whole new successful licensed set of shows nobody will confuse with any other DC properties, since it's always only on Netflix and a very specific alternate world for the heroes, and thus a whole new revenue stream and merchandising opportunities that otherwise wouldn't exist at all. Or it fails and the attempt takes further wind out the sails and nobody can claim the studio didn't give fans what they demanded. And it's unlikely any future movements could arise at the point, since it will be several years down the road and other new DC movies will already be in release in theatres as part of the new overarching DC Studios plan. To continue a moment purely from the cold business perspective for Warner Bros. Discovery, the major creative reasons offered in opposition to doing this are A, it could distract from otherwise harm Warner Bros. Discovery own DC plans because of competing stories for viewers to choose from. B, it once again empowers a fan base that has been hostile to the studio at times and which previously said they only wanted one thing but continued asking for more. And C, it gives the power to make decisions about DC characters to people over whom Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios have no control. You mean the customer, which has always been the way. But anyway, you journalists and people in the industry actually think you can run your businesses and what you say without the money and the customer. You are so deluded. But anyway, however, there are good answers to those concerns. There's also the separate point that Netflix would surely balk at the notion of spending hundreds of millions of dollars to make these streaming movies licensed from another studio, but I'll get to that point after I address the above primary concerns from the creative perspective. If the hypothetically Netflix bought the license to make Snyderverse continuation films and miniseries, it would be exclusively on Netflix and wouldn't compete with anything DC Studios is releasing in theatres. Of course, there would have to be some agreements that the Snyderverse stuff wasn't released at the same time as the DC stuff, whether it's in movie theatres or on streaming. They couldn't be in competition, but, you know, as a thing, I think it would be very interesting and could be very successful for both Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery. But there is the question of finance, and these are things I don't understand. So I'm not going to say, oh, they can do it, it's easy. It's not easy, it's unlikely, but while there's a chance, while there's life, there's hope. Moreover, audiences haven't had any trouble distinguishing between or caring much to even worry about distinguishing between DCEU releases alongside a solo The Batman rebooted franchise and a standalone Joker movie likewise. The collection of shared world shows Arrowverse on the CW, the DC Unlimited series like Titans and Doom Patrol, and the plethora of animated shows and films have all coexisted just fine in streaming and TV, while the movies have their own separate corners too. Audiences just want great movies telling great stories, and that they aren't going to punish or otherwise neglect DCEU cinematic offerings based on some supposed confusion or clash with a series of Netflix movies in a separate shared universe. Additionally, the success or failure of a separate set of Netflix movies isn't going to affect the success or failure of DC Studios' theatrical releases or other DC series on HBO Max and elsewhere. If you need proof of that, I'd point to all of the various Marvel-aligned shows that were on different services and channels, some of which, like The Inhumans, failed miserably without remotely hurting the MCU films and other shows. Did the failure of the Green Lantern movie harm The Dark Knight Rises? Did the success or failure of certain animated series and movies help or hurt DCEU theatrical releases? I'm not saying that supplemental and related series or films isn't capable of having an effect. I'm just saying it doesn't have to, and that it can be controlled either way, especially when we're talking about streaming content entirely apart from everything else and kept in one specific place. And frankly, I don't think DC's new direction and other plans will be so weak that they could be hurt or killed by separate licensed content on Netflix. You don't think? You actually don't have any idea what the new plan is. You don't know if it's weak enough or strong enough. Neither do I. That's a big leap you're making, Mark. I think it could all exist, live or die, and Warner Brothers Discovery and DC Studios would simply be cashing the checks and being glad they finally got out from under the whole things, while being able to honestly say they gave these fans what they wanted. On that latter point, that's another huge advantage for the studio here. Warner Brothers Discovery could honestly say they gave fans what the fans wanted by making the offer. If Netflix declines, then what? Or what if Zack Snyder isn't interested? Or what if he's interested, but it will be a few years before he has his schedule free to make it? Well, the point is, from the Warner Brothers Discovery business perspective, it doesn't matter. Once the offer is made, it's up to Netflix and Snyder to accept or decline, right? If they accept, then the Snyderverse is alive again, but it's someone else's responsibility from now on. If they decline, Warner Brothers Discovery can say, we offered, they said no. That's a good point. What do you expect us to do now? In the meantime, Warner Brothers Discovery and DC Studios will be developing their own projects and plans, but now without the daily and yearly conflict with the segment of fans. It will also help make it easier for fans who spent years resisting any new DC approaches or who have refused to consider the new planned DC films to give in and come back into the broader fandom fold again. Sounds like a cult, doesn't it? Instead of viewing new DC projects as opponents that are in the way of what those fans want, it will be extra DC storytelling in addition to the ones that they want and are going to get. At Netflix, it's easier to win them over because it's harder for them to sustain anger and opposition at that point. You don't know this fandom. If Netflix rejects the offer, then some fans will have a new place to focus efforts. Other fans will probably give up, and still others will hope a different studio steps up to say, we'll take that offer regardless. Warner Brothers Discovery will be in a much better position and could rightly say they're making the offer and open to the whole thing, and it would be pretty hard for anyone to blame them or sustain a campaign against them at that point. But if hopefully Netflix said yes and Snyder was on board too, that it suddenly becomes a win-win for everybody. And then the only issue is making sure the Snyderverse projects are as good as everyone thinks and hopes they can be. But again, that is no longer Warner Brothers Discovery's responsibility. They just cash the licensing checks and merchandising checks because, of course, such films and miniseries would be accompanied by toys, shirts, etc. Let companies bid for the license to make and sell the Snyderverse merchandise exclusively to right. Remember, this is all regardless of how you feel about the DCEU or Snyderverse, and regardless of whether it's successful on Netflix or not. Whatever happens, Warner Brothers Discovery has made the offer and handed off the entire topic once and for all. It mitigates all future questions of what's next or fans wanting more than they said they were asking for, because it's somewhere else and someone else has to answer those questions, not Warner Brothers Discovery, which is what fans say they want anyway, right? This person doesn't like the public because, as I say, this person believes it's him in the media and his fellow journalists and the people who work in the industry who are the important cogs in the wheel. And if us, the consumer, the annoying fans who shout on social media didn't exist, they'd be fine, right? No, because without our money, they're dead. They need us. We need them to talk about the shit. And we need the studios and the actors to do the shit, right? We all need each other. And until we understand that, this little to and from will continue. The concerns about not having creative control is a non-issue, really. If the licensing deal is smart about outlining exactly what this is intended to do, to move forward with those Snyderverse projects consisting of additional Justice League movies, continuing Zack Snyder's Justice League's arc, the Solo, the Batman movie, Wonder Woman 3, and a few others that were to round out the original overall DCEU vision, well, we don't want Wonder Woman 3 unless it's Zack Snyder's vision and not Patty Jenkins. That were to round out the original overall DCU vision by making sure to identify the script's outline stories and treatments that would be used, and including certain conditions like Batman can't eat babies or whatever objectionable or otherwise undesirable things they want to ensure never happen. Warner Brothers Discovery can safely license this narrow pathway forward for some remaining Snyderverse projects. Now, what about the question of whether Netflix would even want to do something this crazy? Well, for starters, and without discussing finances for a moment, the answer to the more general question would Netflix want to license the chance to make their own exclusive DC superhero movies has to be a big yes, of course they would. Netflix already has a great working relationship with Zack Snyder, and even if Snyder merely wanted to produce Snyderverse DCU movies for Netflix rather than direct it himself, which, let's be honest, that's not going to happen. There may be some projects he wouldn't direct himself, but obviously what's pertaining to his arc, he absolutely would. I think the streamer could probably convince him to do so, and he would probably get a kick out of it. He might in fact want very much to direct the JL movies at least, but regardless, I think Netflix would be keen to get their hands on the rights to develop a set of shared world DCEU movies, even if it was only within certain boundaries and limited to a specific number of projects, perhaps with a right to request license extension if the first set are popular enough. The biggest obstacle from Netflix's standpoint would be the cost to produce these films, and this is true, and that's where the real major potential stumbling point comes in. As far as I'm concerned, up to this point, I think there's every reason for Warner Brothers Discovery, DC Studios, Netflix, and Snyder himself to like this idea, but crucially, I think for Warner Brothers Discovery, a key component of any such agreement would probably be that the Snyderverse continuation films must be animated. You see, he's obsessed. He's obsessed with animation. But why? Why are you obsessed with animation? As I said, animation is expensive. We're not talking about Looney Tunes cartoons, who I absolutely think are pioneering and I still watch every morning with a cup of coffee. We're talking about expensive CG animation. So again, he's throwing the animation in there. Anyway, If there's one thing that could instantly make this whole thing seem much more palatable and even desirable to Warner Bros. Discovery and Netflix, it's keeping the Snyderverse in animation format. This guy is obsessed. So there's even less concerns about competing with live-action DC Studios projects, but animation would make less money. There's less chance of success, and it's not what people are demanding. Yes, and when a customer demands something, you should at least listen, because you want to please them, right? You want to make money. You want to take their money now, right? And so the budgets remain much more affordable. I don't see how listen, this is, look, he's going back, right? He's going back to this animation thing. He said that he was done with the animation thing. He's going back to it again. Anyway, a 40 to 50 million animated Justice League film would still cost a fraction of the price of a live action movie, yet would be enough to ensure even higher quality animation and other production values than the usual DC animated movies. It may be cheaper, but the profit margins won't be enough because people want live action, and the live action stuff will actually make a profit and interest people a great deal more. That's the point. Consider a $35 million, but basically he's done this whole thing pretending he thinks this whole thing's a good idea, really just to shove the animation idea in our faces again. Was the budget, so consider $35 million was the budget of Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, which looked spectacular. So for example, boost the Snyderverse film budgets to 40 to 50 million and get 2 hours worth of animation similar to Berserk the Golden Age arc trilogy or Ghost in the Shell 2. Innocence with CGI animation, or go for something like Jim-Ro, The Wolf Brigade, or perhaps Millennium Actresses for the original 1999 Spriggan. Whatever he's talking about, right, this guy is obsessed with making Snyderverse animation. We don't want that. We do not want that. It's not going to happen. No one's going to buy into this. No one's going to carry on. We're not motivated for this hashtag for this reason. But again, at least he's talking about it, right? But anyway, the point is, for 40, 50 million, here he goes again, any of those anime approaches would result in some exceptional looking animated Snyderverse films. I wouldn't watch them. It wouldn't interest me. I don't care about, I'm not interested in anime. And at that price, Netflix might be far more tempted to accept such an offer from Warner Bros. Discovery, since they could essentially make Snyderverse's 2 JL sequels, The Batman and Wonder Woman 3, for the combined price for just one live-action JL sequel. Basically, why would I want this instead of all that live-action stuff? Why would I want this? Now, I don't mind if the Snyderverse on Netflix is successful and in the future they start doing anime and animation. That's different. But this idea is dead. Dead as a doornail, simple as that. Throw in Man of Steel 2, and that's 5 big IP superhero movies with a large and loyal fan base for about 200-250 million spread across several years. I call that a bargain. So what's he saying then? I don't understand what he's saying here. I've been reading this out to you. Is he saying that the animation will be as well as all the other stuff? I'm confused here. He's lost me anyway. Putting aside the issue of fans who knee-jerk reject the suggestion of animated continuation of the Snyderverse for a moment, yes, you don't like it because it's your idea. The idea has lots of potential. The only reason you're saying the idea has lots of potential because it's your idea. It's not what we want, and would fit nicely with Netflix's approach to content. It would be a wonderful opportunity to continue the Snyderverse. No, it wouldn't. Snyder is a fan of anime and might dig the approach as a way to get it done when no other options are realistically likely to materialize. Listen, the only reason I'm supporting this whole thing is because I want live action content. It's as simple as that. Netflix is probably unlikely to spend the money necessary to bring back the original Snyderverse cast for live action big budget movies. Well, if that's the case, let them tell us that, and then we'll stop doing this. Because that's it. I'm not interested. I'm not interested in anything. I don't want the Snyderverse to be completed in book form unless it's alongside the live action stuff. I don't want animation and anime in Snyderverse unless it's other separate stuff from like the JL stuff and Man of Steel 2 and the Batman stuff and all of that, right? Nobody is fighting for this. And Warner Brothers Discovery is unlikely to agree to let another studio make big-budget live-action DC films, regardless of my arguments for why it wouldn't really hurt DC Studios' own plans, especially the issue of the Snyderverse potentially involving characters or plot points that DC Studios might plan to incorporate into their own live-action theatrical releases. We understand, right, that this is all unlikely, but we're not fighting for anime and animation. We're fighting for live action. And this guy is just trying to stir the pot again. I mean, as I say, everyone's happy that he's done that in the movement because at least it's someone kind of a very famous, very good journalist that's talking about this. But this obsession with animation is bollocks. It is also much more likely that all of the original cast could return to voice their characters and for more affordable costs than trying to wrangle them all again for multiple long production in live action to really see this all done in the next several years and to fit within everyone's schedules at this point. I strongly suspect animation fits far better because it's your idea and has greater odds of success in these regards, but it has less of a profit margin. It's going to bring less money and interest in. Wait and see. We should just do it just to prove this guy wrong. The fandom has notable divide over whether anime is an acceptable approach to the Snyderverse. Maybe you're a WB robot who's attempting to divide us. Let's not be divided over the anime and the animation. Let's just say, Mark Hughes, F off, it's a shit idea, let's move on. But if this is the only hope for seeing it continue, and if the results are high quality, as the animated examples mentioned above, and if Snyder is directly involved, I don't see how any fans could seriously complain about getting what they've long wanted from filmmaker they've championed. Because that's not what we want. We want live action. Do you understand me, Mark? Can't you hear me? Is there something wrong with you? We don't want animation and anime. Do you understand? So yeah, film they've championed. If he himself approved of it, and maybe it happened, animation is a fabulous medium for storytelling. Animation is great, and I love it. I'm obsessed with animation and watch it every day. But this is not what I'm fighting for. This is not what I want. This is not why I'm spending nearly 37 minutes thus far on this subject. I'm, spending my oxygen and my free time. This is not what I want at the end of the day. And it's insulting to the artists and filmmakers who work in animation to see it maligned by fans who act as if it's unacceptable as an option. This is typical. This is typical of people today. He's found a way to moralise against people who don't want animated Snyderverse. I'm not insulting people who work in fucking animation. I love you. You're fucking geniuses. Animation, The Simpsons, Family Guys, all this stuff, right? Great animated movies. They're my safe space. They make me feel safe and comfortable. I love them. It's not about disrespecting them, you arse hat. How dare you? How actually dare you? You've used this Netflix campaign just to push the animation yet again. Bloody hell, mate. You should be in fucking germ warfare. You should be playing drafts and chess, mate. You're a tactician. If Warner Brothers Discovery were on board, then this all depends on Netflix and Snyder liking the idea and agreeing to these conditions. Most importantly, probably the animation approach instead of live action. But I think if Warner Brothers Discovery made the offer and at least some of the original cast were up to return for voicing their characters, or if there were other actors Snyder was happy to work with as replacements for... Now he's talking about replacing the fucking actors for those roles, then I can see this appealing to the studio and to Snyder, but nobody really knows unless until the offer is made, of course. I think a proposal for anime continuation of the Snyderverse at Netflix under the production of Snyder's Stone Quarry and within the specific parameters of the original DCEU plans for JL sequels and a few specific solo superhero movies seems to be the best option available if Warner Brothers Discovery wants to move on while being able to say they made the attempt to let the Snyderverse continue if others wanted to do so. If fans want to finally see the Snyderverse completed, if Netflix wants some valuable properties to adapt at a reasonable price, and if Snyder himself is still interested in finishing his story. But it's not what we, the most important element, the fans want. But you've spent half a fucking article boring on about this. Whatever concerns and problems others feel exist, I think I've addressed the main ones here. and demonstrated why it can work. And at least in theory, if those involved could come to an agreement on the conditions, obviously it's not for me to decide what conditions exist or who will agree. I merely say I think this idea I've laid out here seems to fit the bill as a reasonable and acceptable approach, and frankly I don't see any serious chance of the Snyderverse continuing any other way. And if it's not done soon, then too much time will pass and it will fade as even a hypothetical option. You're right. Everyone's getting older. It's gonna, this is, as I say, last chance saloons. But animation isn't an option. So basically, Mark used the whole article. This will teach me a lesson, right? I'm glad I read it to you, though, and I'm glad we did this today on the DC Universe Daily. But he literally spent most of the article pushing an idea that was pushed back on a year or so ago. He got kickback from the fans, the Snyderverse movement, about animation and anime replacing live action if we wanted to restore the Snyderverse. Most of us said no. Now, people like Movie Junkie or Film Junkie, I fell out with him over this because, and I'm talking about Davey Pinar here, and he went to see my YouTube channel and made fun of my YouTube channel. Nice guy, right? He's successful. I'm unsuccessful. Why did little old me bother him? But this is a problem. Once you're successful, you become a bit of a gangster, and that's the problem. This doesn't work for me. I don't want this, and neither do most of the fans. This has been the DC Universe Daily with me, Mick, your host with the most. Just ask your girlfriends and your wives. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss this beautiful perfection, and I'll see you again in the next video. Until I see you again, goodbye, au revoir, auf Wiedersehen.